She was a ghost in a hallway full of color. While other girls wore the latest trends, jeans that fit just right, and tops in soft, fashionable hues, Maya Vasquez wore her father's old combat trousers and olive drab t-shirts. The fabric was always clean and pressed, but it was faded, the knees sometimes a little thin. To the students of Westbrook High, she wasn't just different, she was a target. The whispers started on her first day and quickly grew into open ridicule. "She thinks she's in the army or something?" A jock from the football team would sneer as she walked past, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Maybe she's too poor to afford real clothes," a girl from the popular clique would say, just loud enough for everyone in earshot to hear, her friends giggling in agreement. Maya never responded. She would just clutch her worn-out backpack a little tighter and quicken her pace. She was a loner, but it wasn't by choice. The camouflage was her armor, a silent shield against the world that had already taken so much from her. Her father, Staff Sergeant Elias Vasquez, was halfway across the world on another deployment. Her mother worked double shifts at the county hospital to keep their small apartment. There was no money for back-to-school shopping, and even if there was, Maya wouldn't have asked. Her small act of defiance was wearing his clothes. It made her feel closer to him, a tangible connection to the man she hadn't seen in 10 months. The worn-out cotton smelled faintly of him for a while, but that had faded long ago, replaced by the sterile scent of the laundry room. The ridicule was relentless. One afternoon, during a particularly brutal lunch period, a group of boys surrounded her in the quad. The ringleader, a stocky junior named Kyle, snatched the worn-out dog tags from around her neck. They weren't hers. They were her father's. "Look! Proof she's in her own little war!" Kyle dangled them in the air, laughing. "What's your name, soldier? Got any grenades in that backpack?" Maya's face burned with a mixture of shame and a fierce, protective anger she rarely allowed herself to feel. Her eyes welled up, but she refused to let a single tear fall. "Give them back," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "Those are my dad's." "Your dad's?" Kyle scoffed, looking at the tag. "Vasquez. Never heard of him. Is he a soldier in the make-believe army you're in?" The other boys roared with laughter. Just then, Coach Miller, a gruff man with a whistle around his neck, saw the commotion and yelled at them to break it up. Kyle tossed the dog tags on the ground at Maya's feet before swaggering away. Maya knelt and picked them up, clutching them so hard the metal edges bit into her palm. That was the day the quiet girl in camouflage became something more than just a target for ridicule. A deep-seated resentment began to harden inside her, not just for the kids who tormented her, but for the entire system that allowed it to happen. They mocked her father's service, the very symbol of his sacrifice, without even knowing it. They had no idea of the long, sleepless nights she spent praying for a call that he was okay. They didn't know about the folded flag on her mother's dresser from her grandfather's funeral. They saw only the uniform, not the war it represented. And the next day, she wore the same camouflage pants. But this time, her head was held a little higher, her gaze a little sharper. The mocking didn't stop, but her reaction to it changed. The whispers still stung, but she let them wash over her, a constant, bitter reminder of the world's ignorance. She focused on her classes, escaping into history books and novels, and she found a strange kind of peace in the solitude of the school library. She was building her own world, a quiet fortress of knowledge and memory, far away from the superficiality of the hallways. She would wait. She didn't know for what, but she felt a certainty deep in her bones that her father's world, the world she silently honored with her faded clothes, was about to collide with hers in a way no one could ever imagine. The collision began with a simple letter, and it arrived on a Tuesday, a plain white envelope with her father's distinctive angular handwriting. Inside was a standard military form, a family readiness group newsletter, but her father had scribbled a note in the margins. It was brief, just a few lines. "Hey, mija. Hope school's okay. Things here are Busy. I might have a surprise for you in a few weeks. A buddy of mine is rotating back stateside for some special training in your area. He's going to try and look in on you. You'll know him when you see him. Be good. I love you. Maya read the note a dozen times. A surprise? A friend of her dad's? The possibility sparked a tiny flame of excitement in her chest, a feeling she had almost forgotten. For the first time in months, she felt a connection to her father that wasn't just one-sided. She didn't tell anyone, not even her mom. It was her secret, a small piece of her dad's world that was just for her. She kept the letter folded in her pocket, next to the dog tags. Weeks passed with no sign of any surprise. The initial hope began to fade, replaced by the familiar rhythm of school and loneliness. The mocking continued, a constant, grating soundtrack to her life. One particularly bad day, she had been assigned a group project in history class. The topic was Modern American Heroes. Her group consisted of Kyle, the boy who had stolen her dog tags, and two of his friends. The irony was not lost on her. "So, Vasquez," Kyle said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk, "you're the expert on dressing like a hero. What should our project be on? Fashion disasters of the 21st century?" The other boys snickered. Maya kept her eyes on her notebook. "So we should do it on veterans," she said quietly. "On the sacrifices they make." Kyle rolled his eyes dramatically. "Boring. Nobody cares about that old-school stuff. My dad says the military is just full of people who couldn't make it in the real world. They just want free college and a paycheck." A hot, sharp anger surged through Maya. She gripped her pencil so hard it nearly snapped. She thought of her father, of the pictures she'd seen of him in dusty, dangerous places, of the hollowed-out look in his eyes during their last video call. She thought of the flag on the dresser. "Your dad is wrong," she said, her voice low but trembling with fury. The boys were taken aback by her sudden defiance. Before they could retort, the teacher called for the class's attention. The moment passed, but something had shifted in Maya. But the quiet resentment was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. They could mock her, they could mock her clothes, but they would not mock her father. Later that week, the school held a special assembly. It was announced over the loudspeaker that there would be a special presentation on the football field during last period. The entire school shuffled out, grumbling about the interruption, and filled the bleachers. The autumn sun was warm, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The football team sat together, confident and loud. Kyle and his friends were tossing a football back and forth on the track. The teachers stood along the sidelines, trying to maintain some semblance of order. Maya found a seat at the very top of the bleachers, alone as always, a small figure in her camouflage against the bright sky. The murmur of hundreds of students was a dull roar. Then a sound started to cut through it. It was a low, rhythmic thumping, barely audible at first, then growing steadily louder, more insistent. The thumping vibrated up through the metal bleachers and into the bones of everyone sitting there. The murmur died down, replaced by a confused silence. Heads turned, scanning the sky. Then it appeared. Coming in low over the line of pine trees at the edge of the school property, a massive dark green shape descended. It was a Black Hawk helicopter, its rotors churning the air with incredible force, kicking up a swirling storm of dust and dead leaves on the football field. The wind from the rotors whipped at the flags on the goalposts and sent students' papers and jackets flying. For a moment, everyone was frozen, staring in disbelief at the gigantic war machine settling onto the 50-yard line of their pristine football field. The teachers scrambled, yelling for students to stay back. The football team stood dumbstruck, their swagger completely gone. Kyle dropped the football, his jaw hanging open. The roar of the engines was deafening. The helicopter's skids touched the grass with a gentle thud, and the rotors began their long, slow wind down. The silence that followed was even more profound than the noise that had preceded it. A side door on the helicopter slid open, and a man in full combat gear jumped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with an athletic, purposeful grace. He scanned the bleachers, his eyes shaded by his helmet. He wasn't looking at the crowd in general. He was searching for someone specific. He pulled off his helmet, revealing a close-cropped head of hair and a kind, weathered face. From her perch at the top of the bleachers, Maya stared. The pilot in the cockpit gave her a thumbs up. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She stood up slowly, not believing what she was seeing. The soldier on the ground spotted her immediately. A wide, genuine smile broke across his face. He walked towards the bleachers, his boots crunching on the cinders of the track. Every single student, teacher, and coach watched him, mesmerized. He stopped at the bottom of the bleachers, looking up at the girl in camouflage. "Maya Vasquez?" he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. She could only nod, her voice completely gone. "Your dad sends his love," the soldier said. "I'm Chief Warrant Officer Evans. I flew with your father for 6 years. I promised him I'd come check on you." 1,000 emotions flooded through Maya: shock, disbelief, and a powerful, overwhelming surge of pride. She walked down the bleachers, and with every step, the whispers started again. But they were different now. They were whispers of awe and confusion. "Is that her dad? Who is she? Why is a Blackhawk here for her?" When Maya reached the bottom, Chief Evans extended his hand. She shook it, her own hand small in his. He then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. "This is from your dad, too. He said you'd earned it." Maya opened the pouch and tipped it into her palm. A set of shiny, new dog tags slid out. They weren't her father's old ones. They were new, and on them was her name, Maya Vasquez. The world seemed to stop. And the football field, the staring students, the massive helicopter, it all faded away. Her father had given her her own name to carry. She looked from the tags to the soldier, who gave her a respectful nod. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez talks about you all the time. He says you're the bravest person he knows." Maya looked at the crowd of students, her eyes finding Kyle's. His face was pale, a mixture of shock and dawning horror at what he had done. He finally understood. The girl he had mocked for wearing her father's clothes was not a wannabe soldier. She was the daughter of a warrior, a member of a family that served a cause bigger than any football game or fashion trend. She was carrying a burden he couldn't even begin to comprehend. Chief Evans put a hand on her shoulder. "I have to get this bird back to base. But your dad wanted you to know you're not alone. You never were." He gave her shoulder a squeeze, then turned and jogged back to the helicopter. As the rotors began to turn again, building up to their deafening roar, the crowd remained in absolute silence. They watched the massive machine lift effortlessly into the air, tilt forward, and fly away over the trees, the sound of its engines slowly fading. When they looked back, Maya was still standing there on the track, a tiny figure in camouflage, clutching her new dog tags, the fading light glinting off the metal. She was no longer a ghost. She was seen. The silence that followed the departure of the Black Hawk was heavy, charged with a collective, unspoken apology. No one knew what to say. The students filed back into the school in a daze, the normal chatter of the hallways replaced by a stunned, reverent quiet. Maya walked through the doors, the new dog tags cold against her chest beneath her t-shirt, a tangible secret she now shared with the world. People parted for her, not out of mockery, but out of a strange, new respect. Eyes that had once held disdain now held a flicker of curiosity, even awe. The next few days were a surreal blur. The story of the Black Hawk landing on the football field spread like wildfire, not just through the school, but through the entire town. Local news stations picked it up. Reporters called the school, asking for interviews with the girl in camouflage. The principal, Mr. Henderson, a man who had previously turned a blind eye to the bullying, now sought Maya out, in offering her a private space to study if the hallways became too hectic. The teachers, who had done little more than offer a sympathetic look, now went out of their way to praise her resilience in class. The most profound change, however, was in the students. The ringleaders of the mockery, like Kyle, were now completely deflated. They avoided eye contact with Maya, shrinking back into the shadows they had once forced her into. Others, however, tried a different approach. They offered tentative smiles in the hallway. A girl from her English class asked if she wanted to be a partner for an upcoming assignment, her voice nervous and hopeful. A group of boys who had never spoken to her before nodded respectfully as she passed. For Maya, this sudden shift was disorienting and, in some ways, more difficult than the bullying itself. She had built her walls high and strong, and now people were trying to climb over them. She didn't know how to react to their kindness. Was it genuine? Or was it just because they were now afraid of her, or rather of what her father represented? The validation felt hollow. It wasn't for her, the girl who loved to read and was good at history. It was for the girl whose dad had a friend who flew a Black Hawk. It was for the symbol she had become. She retreated further into her solitude, spending her lunches in the library, her only companion the stack of books she was devouring. The attention felt like a spotlight she hadn't asked for, exposing her in a way the ridicule never had. She missed the anonymity, the ability to just be invisible. Now she was a walking legend, and the weight of it was heavy. One afternoon, a week after the event, she was sitting in her usual secluded spot in the library, reading, when someone slid into the chair opposite her. She looked up, startled. It was a girl named Sarah, a quiet, artistic type who was also something of an outcast. She was drawing in a sketchbook, her head down. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, not looking up from her drawing, "for never saying anything, for just watching." Maya didn't know what to say. Sarah finally lifted her head. Her eyes were earnest, holding a depth of understanding Maya hadn't expected. "My brother is in the Marines," Sarah continued quietly. "He's in Afghanistan right now. I know what those dog tags mean. I know what you were going through." She slid her sketchbook across the table. It was a detailed, incredibly moving pencil drawing of a soldier in combat gear, his face weary but resolute, kneeling to hug a little girl. It was titled Homecoming. Maya stared at the drawing, a lump forming in her throat. It was the first time anyone had spoken to her, not as the girl with the helicopter dad, but as someone who understood. Sarah hadn't been drawn to the spectacle. She had recognized the shared experience. For the first time in a long time, Maya didn't feel so alone. She looked at Sarah and gave her a small, genuine smile. "My dad's been gone 10 months, Maya whispered. Sarah nodded, a flicker of shared pain in her eyes. "It's the hardest thing, isn't it? The waiting." That simple conversation in the quiet library was the first brick in a new wall Maya was building. Not a wall to keep people out, but the foundation of a new life. A life where she could be herself. Not just the daughter of a soldier, but a girl with her own fears, her own passions, and her own capacity for friendship. The weeks that followed were a period of slow, tentative healing. Her friendship with Sarah blossomed. They would sit together at lunch, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about books, art, and their fears for their brothers and fathers. Sarah introduced Maya to her small circle of friends, kids who were also on the fringes of the school's social scene, a boy who played the guitar, a girl who wrote poetry. They didn't care about the helicopter or the camouflage. They cared about Maya's dry wit and her surprising knowledge of classic literature. It was through Sarah that Maya found a new way to channel her feelings. Sarah was working on a project for the school's annual art showcase, a series of portraits. She asked if she could paint Maya. I want to paint you, Maya, not with the helicopter or the soldiers, just you, in your camouflage, the real you. Maya agreed. During their sessions, she would talk about her father, the silly jokes he told, the way he taught her to ride a bike, the lullaby he used to sing to her when she was little. She talked about her mother, a quiet hero in her own right, working herself to exhaustion to keep their family afloat. The painting became a kind of therapy, a way of telling her story on her own terms. The day of the art showcase arrived. The school gymnasium was transformed into a gallery, with student artwork lining the walls. A large crowd of students, parents, and teachers milled about. Sarah's portrait of Maya was the centerpiece. It was stunning. It showed Maya sitting in a field of wildflowers, the camouflage pants and t-shirt blending into the natural setting in a way that was both surprising and beautiful. She wasn't looking at the viewer. She was looking off into the distance, a serene, peaceful expression on her face. The dog tags were visible around her neck, but they weren't the focus. The focus was her strength, her quiet dignity. People gathered around it, murmuring in appreciation. Maya stood nearby with Sarah, feeling a strange mix of pride and vulnerability. Then, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "That's my daughter." Maya spun around. Standing at the entrance to the gymnasium in his crisp dress uniform was her father. Staff Sergeant Elias Vasquez looked thinner, and there were new lines on his face. But his smile was the same warm, beaming smile she had carried in her heart for 11 months. She didn't remember running. One moment she was standing by the painting, the next she was in his arms, sobbing into his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him that she thought she had forgotten. He held her tight, his own eyes glistening, whispering, "I'm here, mija. I'm home." The crowd around them faded into a blur of happy tears and gentle applause. Her mother appeared, and the three of them stood together, a family reunited. Maya looked over her father's shoulder at the painting of herself. It was no longer just a picture. It was a symbol of the journey she had taken, a journey from isolation and mockery to understanding, friendship, and the unshakable love of her family. As she stood there, wrapped in her father's arms, the camouflage she wore was no longer just her father's clothes. It was her own. She had earned it.